Well, welcome everybody. I know it's first talk after lunch, so I'm excited to get the energy back up, learn some interesting things today. I'm Max. I totally jumped on the opportunity to have this talk and have Matthew give it because it's this conversation about Agile at scale and scaled Agile frameworks is one that I just can't get away from. And especially right now with like JIRA Align joining the family, so much to be learned and so much to explore. And it's tempting to think that it's starting now, but I think what we'll learn today is that there's some other folks in history that have been playing around with this idea for a long time, and we probably have something to learn from them as well. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to Matt Lawrence. All right, go get him. Thanks.
Everyone, thanks so much for showing up. I really appreciate that. I know it's kind of late in the conference and energy levels start to flag a little bit at this point, but so thank you so much. A couple of things about this talk. So I'm a group product manager. I work on the server side of the business. I'm responsible for Confluence, mobile, and portfolio for JIRA. This talk is possibly a little bit unusual. I'm going to present a whole bunch of ideas. They're very, very raw. So I guess the frame of mind to bring to this is that I've written a draft Confluence page and I've mentioned all of you on it. And then you follow the link from your email, which you'll inevitably get, and click on the page and go, whoa, this is somewhere between like an interesting visionary idea and the ramblings of a madman. So I'm kind of going for that middle third piece. That's where we're aiming for. The second half of the presentation is kind of dense. It's intentionally so because there's a lot of material I wanted to get through. Please, take photos, whatever, throw rocks at the end, but I'd encourage you to go away and have a think about what I'm presenting to you and really take this as an opportunity to kick off a dialogue. Like, reach out to me. I'm totally accessible and I'd like to discuss these ideas with you, but this is not the sanctioned Atlassian view, I guess. This is my perspective and a bit of a journey that I'm going on. So my job is to build tools that help people scale Agile. Anyone who's done any scaled Agile work before knows that that's a really, really hard thing to achieve. Cold comfort for you, but it's actually a really hard thing to build products for as well too. So I'm sorry about that. We're trying to get better. So part of the journey I've been on is we need to get the thinking right that underlies the way we look at scaled Agile and the way we think about scaled Agile. And starting with the tools is probably the wrong way to do that. And I think a lot of people tend to approach it from a tool-based perspective and think less about what we're trying to achieve as an organization. So just a quick poll. Is anyone in the audience currently looking at an Agile transformation or going through an Agile transformation? Just a show of hands. Oh, that's quite a lot of people. Okay, cool. Is anyone from a smaller company or was a smaller company and is kind of expanding and you've got a bunch of Agile teams but things are starting to fall apart now that you've got a lot of dependencies to manage and the projects are a little bit bigger? Is anyone coming from that space? Okay, awesome. Is anyone finding the tools a little bit frustrating in that environment? That really should be everyone. Has anyone seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? Okay, awesome. If you said yes to any of those things, you're totally in the right room. Okay, so the agenda, a little bit unusual. We're going to start off with some time travel. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Agile at scale and how I see organizations fitting in that very, very loosely. We're going to have an honest conversation about tools and the fact that tools won't save you. And that will lead us to another conversation about what we actually can do about it and the way of thinking about this problem space. So let's start off with some time travel. This is a story about a large Agile organization, and to see it, we're going to have to go to another continent and back in time around about 1,000 years. So time travel is kind of confronting, so let's do it stage by stage. We'll stop off at 2001, so turn of the century, with the publishing of the Agile Manifesto. So this is the website that kind of moved Agile for teams into public consciousness. Hopefully you're all familiar with this on some level. But this really kind of kicked off that awareness revolution around Agile. But of course, this wasn't the start of the Agile transformation or the Agile approach to life. Scrum actually came from a Harvard Business Review publication in 1986. But not even that was the start. We can go back to just after World War II, when Kanban was inspired by watching people shop in shopping centers. But even that's not far back enough. There is actually a more logical place to start when thinking about scaled Agile. And that's with this guy, 13th century Mongolia. This is Genghis Khan. Now, he's probably not the first person that you think of when you're thinking about scaled Agile. But hopefully you've actually mostly heard about Genghis Khan. Now, he's famous not for scaled Agile, but he's famous for uniting the previously disparate Mongol tribes and creating the largest contiguous empire in human history. I've included the Roman Empire there. They weren't actually in the same time period, but everyone kind of knows about the Roman Empire and has this image of it of being this large, all-conquering military machine, but it was actually kind of a suburb on the outskirts of the Mongol Empire. So this is an amazing achievement by any stretch, and it kind of begs the question, how did they actually do it? So there are many myths about the Mongols, okay? They have a reputation for savagery, they have a reputation for being unstoppable and barbaric, suicidally brave, and relying upon their endless streams of superior numbers to defeat their enemies. Now they did have a justified reputation for savagery. They had a surrender or die policy when conquering their enemies. And they definitely had a willingness to use terror on some civilian civilizations, civilized populations, sorry. So they were not a particularly nice people when it came to warfare, but they were definitely not suicidal, and they were not very numerous. So by way of example, when the Mongols invaded Western Xia, which is an empire located south of Mongolia in modern-day China, they had roughly 30,000 troops up against what historians estimate to be about 270,000. Now that 270,000 troops were in walled cities, they were well organized, they were well supplied, and they had gunpowder. So you've got 30,000 people up against 270,000, that's a 9-to-1 ratio, and you're riding horses out of, the grassy plains of Mongolia to fight people who have gunpowder, and you win. And the contempt that a lot of the Chinese kingdoms had for the Mongols was quite palpable. So this is a letter from the Emperor Jinsheng, which was sent to Genghis Khan. Our empire is like the sea. Yours is but a handful of sand. How can we fear you? How indeed? How can a large, well-organized, well-funded, bureaucratic organization be threatened by a smaller one? That just would never happen. So how did an organization that was relatively primitive, they weren't even literate. In fact, the legend goes that when Genghis Khan received this letter, he looked at it and went, ha ha, I can't read this. Hand it over. So the debate amongst historians is, how did the Mongols achieve this? How did they subjugate empires that were vastly larger and vastly more technologically advanced? Now, the debate often centers on the characteristics of an individual Mongol soldier. So Mongol soldier, very, very tough, very, very capable as an individual. And their two characteristic weapons were their hardy war ponies, which they rode to battle, and the composite bow. Composite bow is a very, very sophisticated weapon. Two neat tricks with that. You can shoot it when you're riding towards someone, and you can turn around and shoot it when you're riding away from someone. I won't demonstrate that on stage. I have a 4-year-old son who would love to see that, but I'm not going to do it. I have limits. So the truth was, though, that there's nothing particularly remarkable about riding around on a horse and shooting arrows at people. That is a style of combat that had been around millennia throughout all of Eurasia. Even when the Mongols got as far as Eastern Europe, they were fighting other enemies who already had mounted archers. So if it wasn't their weapons, what was it that gave this ability to beat larger organizations? Now, the key element, and the most convincing element I've read, is that it was about the organization that Genghis Khan adopted. So Genghis Khan had a policy of absolute trust in his commanders. They had very, very small units. They acted with a very, very high level of autonomy. And this provided them with the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions on the battlefield. And that allowed them to outmaneuver, outwit, and therefore defeat larger, much better equipped enemies. Let's go into a little bit of detail about how that worked. So the basic unit of organization in the Mongol army was the Arban, 10 warriors. This was a group that got together, and they were basically a group of equals. And they would choose a representative. So the night before a battle, they would get together as a group of 10. They would talk about their fears, their concerns, some ideas for how they can defeat the enemies they're going to encounter the next day. And they would choose a representative who would go on to represent them at the next level up, which is the Jagun, 100 warriors. Now the Jagun, therefore, has a group of 10 which can make a decision for that unit. And they, in turn, would, like the next level down, choose a representative. And that representative would go to represent them at the next level up, which is the Mingan, which is 1,000 warriors. There are 10 warriors here again leading that unit. They would choose a representative who would go on to represent them at the next level up, which is the Tumen. So I've jumped through that very quickly, but if you're following along and counting with the maths, that's 4 meetings to get all of the ideas from every single soldier in the army right up to the commander. And 3 more meetings for them to communicate the decisions made at that level back down. That means in 7 meetings, so say 7 hours held over the night before a battle, the entire army can align around strategy, it can align around risks, it can align around the expectations of what will come the next day. So as a result, every warrior, very well informed about what they're trying to achieve and felt capable of innovating at any scale to respond to whatever the enemy did. Now that may sound like a kind of a weird orthogonal thing, and thank you for sitting through my history lesson on medieval military history, but we've actually heard of this more recently. We would call it the Scrum of Scrums, which was apparently invented in 2001. Okay. But the idea itself, obviously, isn't very new. Agile thinking for small teams or large empires is not a new way of thinking. Another thing to take away from that lesson as well too, the Mongols did it without any Agile software tools. By and large, they weren't even literate, but they were very effectively Agile. Okay, so cool story, bro. Awesome, fantastic. What's the actual takeaway? Genghis Khan's challenges were exactly the same challenges that large organizations are facing today. How do we achieve alignment? How do we achieve mutual understanding? How do we get a group of different teams that have very different views on the world to work together effectively and come together and execute on a shared goal, but without taking away the flexibility that they can bring to the table? How do we achieve that? And that's a problem I think we can all understand, and Genghis Khan was very successful at solving the problem. So let's jump to Agile at scale now. At a high level, I think, I'm going to try and keep this as general as possible. At a high level, I think there are basically two kinds of organizations that are facing Agile at scale challenges. And I like to put them into two simple buckets. One of them I call growing, which is Agile and scaling. Now the background of this would be you'd be a typical small, often a tech company. Agile's part of your DNA already. Okay, your teams are working in an Agile way. Maybe you're adding a couple of extra teams. They're still working in quite an Agile way. Everyone grabs tools as they need to. You change the way you work to adapt to your environment. It all works really, really well. But then you hit a certain size, 100, 150 people, 300 people, and suddenly dependencies get a little bit harder to track. It gets a little bit harder to align people around common goals. Okay, I know some of you put your hands up for facing that. I would put Atlassian themselves in that bucket. We've grown super fast over recent years, and although Agile's part of our DNA, we definitely feel the pain about keeping that capability as we grow larger and larger. At the other end of the scale, we have transforming, and this is scale but not Agile. These are large, very successful organizations. They could be finance organizations, they could be medical, they could be manufacturing organizations. They're great at scale, they're super successful, but now they need to change their practices to be a lot more agile, to be a lot more adaptable. So they want to be able to change the way they work, but not lose the successful scale capacity that they have that has given them such a dominant position in whatever market they're currently in. So hopefully that resonates with all of you on some level. Okay, so that's the two ends. Linking those two together is the same intrinsic problem. Okay, how do we get alignment? How do we manage dependencies? So the first place that a lot of us start to look when we encounter this challenge is we go, there must be some tools that can make this easy. There must be some tools that can make this a trivial activity. The short answer is nah, there aren't. A fool with a tool is still a fool, only faster. I like to call this is a quote from Don Price. You might have seen Don Price present earlier. He likes his provocative quotes, so I like to grab his provocative quotes and provoke people with them. This is not just about tools, it's about people. I think the key element here is that Agile scale is actually a culture problem. And I hope the Mongol example really brought that home for you. If you can successfully scale Agile without software, if you can successfully scale Agile without the written word, then surely tools are actually a bit of a misdirection in the starting point for solving this problem. Agility doesn't start with tools. Tools are just there to amplify and enable practices that we actually use. The way I like to say it is that tools are essentially a mirror and a magnifying glass. They reflect what we are, only much more so. So therefore, understanding culture and changing culture is what we need to do to unlock innovation. So, wouldn't be a proper product management presentation without some sort of abstract pyramid diagram. Hopefully no one's going, oh no, not another pyramid diagram. There is actually a good reason to use a pyramid in this case. Now you'll notice that tooling is a little small bit up alongside solid processes at the very top there. Now the only thing I wanted to illustrate with using a pyramid here is that there are actually multiple levels which are largely cultural and behavioral that we need to lay as our foundations before we can be successful with tooling. And I don't know if anybody here has actually built a pyramid before, but starting at the top won't help you build the foundations a lot better. It's worth a try, but I wouldn't do it at home. So what I'm going to present to you now is a set of foundations. Now, these are just theoretical. I'm expecting you to challenge these. If you walk out of this room thinking, wow, that was the total answer, I'm going to go back and implement this straight away, you probably haven't been paying attention. But if you think, yeah, maybe there's some interesting stuff in here, I could challenge a lot of it, that would be an awesome outcome from my perspective. So we have 5 basic foundations for scaling Agile. Visibility. We believe that visibility unlocks faster time to customer value. Evolve. Implicitly, organizations must evolve and adapt. Decisions. In knowledge work, probably the most important thing we do is make decisions. More than actually implementing things, the real crux of what we do is make decisions, and hopefully the right decisions. Structure. Kind of a contentious one. While there's no one-size-fits-all solution, scaling Agile does in fact require structure. It's a little bit different to at the team level. And team of teams. The power of a team of teams enables better outcomes. In the same way that a team of individuals is vastly more powerful, the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. The same is true as of a team of teams. So let's go into a little bit more detail now. So visibility, we believe visibility unlocks faster time to customer value through shared understanding and alignment, situational awareness, that is ensuring that every team has the information that it needs when it needs it, and highlighting bottlenecks, risks, and dependencies. I think that first and third points, they're pretty straightforward. No one finds those particularly contentious. The situational awareness one is a little bit nuanced. There were presentations earlier today about open. Open's a really, really interesting one. Like, there's a lot of customers who really love that concept. There's some customers who find that a little bit challenging. The idea that just the free flow of information is intrinsically good. I like the term situational awareness because there are 2 times when information is a problem. 1, when you don't have enough of it, and 2, when you have way too much. So it's really about ensuring that we've got the information we need, but only the information that we need. Evolve. We believe in the necessity of adapting through everyone challenging the status quo, understanding current and future changes to your environment, learning from making a balanced portfolio of bets, and building a culture of experimentation. This is probably the hardest one to change. A lot of organizational cultures have a perspective that you go out, you make the right plans, you make the right decisions, and you execute on those. The simple fact is the only way to know whether you've made the right decision is to go out and do something, and then you will know in retrospect. So the key thing is, how do I de-risk that? How do I acknowledge the fact that when I do something, I'm actually just taking a chance? And the idea there is to have a slightly more scientific approach, a research-based approach, which is that everything we do is actually an experiment. And the worst outcome we can get from an experiment is that we learn something. So there's no such thing as a failed experiment per se. You've just learnt that, here's one of the 1,000 ways not to do something. It's a very important change in thinking, though. Decisions. We believe decision-making is best done by those closest to the problem through the use of goals rather than instructions and relinquishing of control by leadership. Now, the use of goals rather than instructions is really around, that's where we start to use things like the OKR framework and stuff like that, where we actually say, look, we're just going to set what we're trying to achieve, and we enable the teams and empower the teams to figure out the best way to do that. The other element here, which is a bit more nuanced, is decision-making is made by those people closest to the problem. Now, by closest to the problem, if you're relatively junior in an organization, you're working at the coalface, you probably think, yeah, it's us. Not necessarily. It's anyone through the organization can be closest to the problem. It depends on the scale and the scope of the problem. So a support engineer may be the best person to make a decision about which bugs you prioritize in your backlog. Conversely, if there's some major strategic impact that's affecting the whole organization, the person closest to that problem is probably the CEO. Regardless, the general principle we should apply is move the information and the decision-making to the person who's best equipped to make that decision. Don't try and move the information, the decision-making to some random point or some arbitrary point on a hierarchy. Structure. We believe that while there's no one-size-fits-all solution, scaling Agile requires structure, including planning and reporting, shared ways of engaging other teams, shared and agreed-to language, alignment between behaviors, practices, and tools, and evolving customization of a framework. So the key here is that above a certain size, we need to start agreeing on how teams work together, and we do need to have a measure of alignment or standardization. So individual teams still need to work in the way that they work best, but when we build interfaces between those teams, we need to have shared interfaces. Evolving customization of a framework is kind of an interesting one. If you're doing any scaled Agile, at some point you'll run into SAFe or Disciplined Agile or LESS or one of the frameworks. Atlassian's kind of always had a position of being agnostic about frameworks. There's a good reason for that, and the fact is, once you go through the implementation of SAFe or something similar, whether you implement a vanilla version or you customize it from the start, at some point you will need to modify it to meet the cultural requirements of your organization and your business context. So Agile is not a destination, Agile is a constant journey, and that's why we need to be thinking about this constant customization. Team of teams. We believe in the power of a team of teams to enable better outcomes through shared purpose and goals, individual teams with the power to work the way that meets their needs, engaged teams that believe in the impact they have on the organization, and commitment to organizational outcomes over team outcomes. That last point's probably the hard one. I don't think those first three are that challenging. Everyone kind of believes and understands in those ones. But commitment to our organizational outcomes over team outcomes is the hard thing to balance. Teams do need to work in their own way, but they need to do it in a way that aligns with the overarching organization. And sometimes that means working in a suboptimal way for that individual team. Okay, cool. So that was a huge amount to absorb. So essentially what I've done there is I've presented this big, elaborate, kind of complex, abstract framework, and it's like going, great, that's fantastic. How do I use this now to inform the tools that we're building? How do I use that to build better solutions for you? Going back to my pyramid. So if we lay the right foundations, lying on those foundations will be a set of behaviors. And those behaviors will then drive a set of practices, and those practices should ladder up to a good selection of tools, and those tools should be enabled by and support those underlying components. So to go into that in more detail, be really explicit about those definitions, your foundations are the core elements on which we build a sustainable and scalable agile organization. Those were those 5 things that I talked about before. Behaviors, these are very hard to mandate. They're culturally contextual, so it depends on the country or the culture that you're working within, or the mix of cultures you're working within. And indeed, it will vary between organizations and sub-teams as well too. But there are hundreds of different ways that you can embody a culture inside a behavior. Then we have practices on top of that. Now, practices are actually codified ways of working. They're not as rigid as processes, but they're what we call plays. And the most concrete example I can give you of that is the Atlassian playbook. Has anyone actually had a chance to look at the Atlassian playbook? Yep, that's totally not enough of you. It's free, just Google it, Atlassian playbook. It's not a marketing thing, it's not something we charge for. It's a set of plays, a set of ways that we work as a team, or as teams within Atlassian, and we use it every single day. It's what we actually work on. So it's our version. It may not work out of the box for your organization, but it's certainly a really good starting point. Once we have that, the very final point is when we actually hit the tools, and at that point, Atlassian software is possibly a good solution for you. So let's go through some solid examples of that. We'll start off with the Mongolian Horde. That's team of teams. So team of teams is one of those principles I said before, those foundational things. And 2 of the points from that, individual teams with the power to work the way that meet their needs, commitment to organizational outcomes. The behaviors we expect from that, teams trust other teams, really important on the battlefield. Communicate and understand intent, that's how strategy comes from the top of the organization down. And all communication needs to work as loops to continually test and verify understanding. These behaviors may resonate with you, they may not, they'll be different for every organization. The practices, the 10-troop RBAN-based unit of scrums, and the election of a leader who represents that unit. And the tools they used, absolutely none. Okay, so let's move this into the 21st century. Team of teams, same foundational principle. Foundations, same one I said before, individual teams with the power to work the way that meets their needs, commitment to organizational outcomes. Teams use the tools the way they need to. Teams adapt to working with other teams. Practices, here are 2 plays from the Atlassian playbook, roles and responsibilities and ludicrously complex projects. We're pretty blunt about what the plays are supposed to achieve. But this is a way for you to clearly articulate how what your team is responsible for and how it engages with other teams. And the tools that will help work on top of this is JIRA and Portfolio for JIRA, JIRA Align, and Confluence. Each of these tools, so for example in Confluence we have plays embodied in certain templates, but each of these tools is designed to make those practices easy and to support those practices. Decisions. So decisions, again, one of those foundational principles. Decisions are made by those closest to the problem, and relinquishing of control by leadership. The behaviors we expect from that, get the right people involved in decisions, clearly communicate decisions, and leave decisions closed unless there's new information. These kind of embody the 3 positive patterns of the decision anti-pattern. That is in, like, you've left someone off a decision, people find out about the decision too late, They come back and then later challenge it, and you're forced to reopen the decision. All of this time wasting, all of this confusion, a whole associated set of misallocated resources. And the practices we use at Atlassian to avoid these problems are the DAISY decision-making framework and an inclusive meetings play. It's fine if you invite all the right people to the room, but if they don't feel empowered to talk and raise their point in that meeting, you haven't had a successful meeting. And the tools here, let's get specific in Confluence, for example, there is a DAISY template. So you just fire up a page and say, hey, I'm going to create a new DAISY. It'll walk you through the process, help you identify your stakeholders. You can mention them on the page, so the communication is automatically included. So you can leverage the whole Atlassian communication framework there, which includes mentions, shares, watching of pages, notifications, even the popular stream. There's all these ways that Confluence helps you get the message out about the fact that there is a decision about to be made, being made, has been made. Structure, another underlying principle. Foundation from there could be, say, shared ways of engaging other teams. Behaviors might be shared language and terminology. It's a nice, easy thing to start with, and shared interfaces between teams. Some of the practices that we use to achieve that inside Atlassian, the health monitor. This is a play that we use on a monthly basis for pretty much every team. It's a good way to tease out when there are problems in the way the team is working, and most of those problems come from communication. Roles and responsibilities and rules of engagement. So two other plays that help you clearly define who owns what and where the limits are. And again, the tools that are built to support this include Confluence, JIRA, and JIRA Align. So all of these practices are embodied in one way or another within these tools. Now hopefully I've been hammering away at this point a little bit. Hopefully you can see that if you adopt Confluence or you adopt JIRA, you will get benefits from it. Like, I think they're very, very powerful tools. However, if you lay the foundations, if you lay the behavioral foundations underneath this, and you adopt practices, and those practices align with the tools, what you will unlock is 10 to 100 times more effective. So, just to recap that, going from our pyramid to something vaguely logical, we've got foundations, the core elements on which we build sustainable and scalable agile organization. Behaviors, hundreds of different ways of thinking and working that are defined by the unique culture of your organization. Practices, start with the Atlassian playbook. In my ideal world, everyone will be writing plays and contributing back to the playbook from all over the world. You're all in different industries, you're all in different organizations, you're all from a range of cultures. There are different ways to approach solving these problems. And at the very, very top, maybe Atlassian software is the right thing for you, maybe it isn't. I like to think there's actually a pretty good chance it will be. So, in closing, one last note on Genghis Khan. Before Genghis Khan actually went on to try and conquer the entire world, legend has it that he was at a tribal meeting and he was frustrated with trying to get his leaders to agree on a next course of action. So he walked out of the yurt, hopped onto his horse, and just rode off onto the plains. And he was alone there, out underneath the sky, and he looked up at the sky and he thought, there's one sky above the whole world. Surely it makes sense to have one empire over the whole world. So I guess when we're sitting in the office at your desk in front of your laptop, getting frustrated with another meeting or another process or another stakeholder who just won't buy into what you're trying to achieve, or maybe won't help you in a proactive way, my recommendation was take some Genghis Khan time, ride out onto the plains, look up onto the sky, decide, maybe how your vision for the world would be, and then go back and set fire to all of their cities. No, I'm joking about the cities part. That's fine. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Appreciate your time.